In 1909, a woman named Eleanor Vance sat in a Boston townhouse and told her grandson something that would trouble him for the rest of his life. She was 93 years old. She had watched the 19th century turn into the 20th, and she told him with absolute clarity that the stars were not where they used to be. Not metaphorically, not poetically. She meant the actual position of stars in the night sky had shifted in ways that contradicted everything the scientific institutions of her time were prepared to acknowledge. Her grandson, Charles Vance, documented this conversation in a journal entry dated March 14, 1909. The entry runs to nearly 2,000 words. It has never been published in full. It exists in the Special Collections Archive at the Boston Public Library, catalogue number van 1909-0314, and in 134 years it has been consulted by exactly 17 researchers. Eleanor Vance died 4 months after that conversation. She took whatever direct knowledge she possessed with her. What remains is Charles's account of what she said, and what she claimed to have observed across a 93-year lifespan that stretched from 1816 to 1909. This is the account of what one woman remembered, and what the institutions around her worked systematically to prevent her from being believed. Eleanor had grown up in rural Connecticut, in a house without gaslight, without instruments, without the apparatus that separates scientific observation from what we now call anecdotal evidence. She had watched the sky because the sky was there. She had been taught the constellations by her father, a merchant sea captain named Thomas Whitmore, who had navigated by stars for 40 years. Between 1822 and 1835, she had committed those constellations to memory with the precision required of a captain's daughter, who might one day need that knowledge to survive. She knew where Orion stood. She knew the path of Cassiopeia. She knew the position of the Pleiades to within what she described as the space of a thumbnail held at arm's length. In 1835, Eleanor's father died. She was 19 years old. She did not stop watching the stars. She married a textile merchant named William Vance in 1838. She raised 4 children. She moved to Boston in 1851. She continued on clear nights to walk to Beacon Hill and look upward. She kept no formal records. She made no measurements. She simply remembered where things had been, and she noticed gradually, across the span of nearly 50 years, that where things had been was not where things were anymore. She first mentioned this to her husband in 1879. She was 63 years old. She told him that Cassiopeia seemed to have rotated slightly westward, that the angle between certain fixed stars had widened in a way that felt wrong, that the Pleiades seemed to occupy a space in the sky that was no longer quite where she remembered it from her childhood. Her husband, according to Charles's journal, suggested that memory was unreliable, that the human mind plays tricks across decades, that what she was experiencing was not celestial movement but the natural erosion of childhood precision. This was kind. It was also dismissive. She did not mention it again for 17 years. In 1896, Eleanor brought the matter to the attention of Dr. Henry Draper's widow, Anna Palmer Draper, a woman of considerable scientific standing and patronage. Anna Palmer Draper funded the Draper catalogue of stellar spectra. She was not a woman easily dismissed. Eleanor Vance, then 80 years old, presented her with a careful written account of what she had observed. The letter, which survives in the Draper papers at the Library of Congress, runs to 4 pages. In it, Eleanor describes specific stars, the angles between them as she remembered them from 1820 to 1835, and her observations of their current positions as of 1896. She writes, in precise language that contradicts any notion of her as a confused elderly woman, "I do not claim precision in measurement. I claim only the consistency of memory across a span long enough that casual error cannot account for the magnitude of the discrepancies I have observed. The human eye, when it has looked at the same object for 60 years, develops a knowledge of that object that instruments cannot easily contradict. Anna Palmer Draper's response survives as well. It was kind. It was also final. She wrote, "Your observations are noted with respect for your character and your evident care. The possibility you raise has been considered by the most advanced astronomical institutions of our age. No evidence supports systematic displacement of the celestial sphere. The instruments at our disposal have detected no such movement. I would counsel that the human memory, however reliable in other respects, is not the proper instrument for celestial measurement. I hope you understand this in the spirit of assistance in which it is offered." Eleanor did understand it. She also did not accept it. For 13 more years she watched. She did not contact other scientists. She did not publish anything. She simply continued her observations, and she harboured, in the way that silenced people do, the quiet certainty that something had occurred which the institutions designed to observe such things were not equipped to see, or were not willing to see. What Eleanor had observed, or believed she had observed, touched on a question that astronomy had been avoiding since the 1850s. The precession of the equinoxes was known. Stellar aberration was known. The proper motion of stars was known. But there were anomalies in measurements that did not fit these known categories. Between 1857 and 1862, the astronomer Friedrich Wilhelm Struve had noted apparent inconsistencies in stellar position measurements that seemed to vary not just from observer to observer, but cyclically, across periods of years. The measurements should have been consistent. They were not. Struve published his findings in 1863. The astronomical community received them with skepticism bordering on coldness. The suggestion was that Struve's instruments were faulty, or his observations were flawed, or he was misinterpreting natural variation. Struve retreated. He did not publish further on the subject. He died in 1864. The question remained unresolved. In 1875, an American astronomer named Simon Newcomb had begun a systematic program of stellar position measurement at the Naval Observatory in Washington. The program was designed to create the most precise star catalogue ever assembled. It was extraordinarily ambitious. It involved hundreds of measurements taken using state-of-the-art instruments, recorded with obsessive care. The Newcomb catalogue, when completed in 1898, contained the positions of over 10,000 stars. It was, by any standard, a triumph of precision. But there was something wrong with it, or perhaps more accurately, there was something about it that raised questions that Newcomb himself was not prepared to answer in public. In 1897, the year before his catalogue was completed, Newcomb received a letter from a German astronomer named Theodor Jacobi. Jacobi had compared Newcomb's new measurements with measurements taken by earlier astronomers using older instruments. Jacobi found systematic discrepancies, not random variation. Systematic, some stars appeared to have shifted position by as much as 2 arc-minutes over the preceding 50 years. An arc-minute is 1/60th of a degree. 2 arc-minutes of apparent movement would be visible to anyone watching the sky carefully over a lifetime. Jacobi's letter questioned whether these movements could be explained by known mechanisms of stellar motion. Jacobi's letter was never answered. It was filed. It has never been published. Newcomb finished his catalogue. He presented it as definitive. He did not acknowledge the discrepancies that Jacobi had identified. No one else raised the question. The astronomical community accepted the Newcomb catalogue as truth. And within that acceptance, the possibility that the celestial sphere might be moving in ways that contradicted established models was dismissed into silence. Eleanor Vance did not know about Friedrich Struve. She did not know about Simon Newcomb's doubts. She did not know about Theodore Jacobi's unacknowledged letter. She knew only what she had seen. She knew that the stars were not where they had been. And she knew that when she said this to people with authority and education, they found ways to suggest that the problem was not with the stars, but with her. In 1908, Eleanor was 92 years old. She was living with her son, William Vance Jr., and his wife in their Boston home. She had 1 year left to live, though no one knew that yet. Her great-grandson, Charles Vance, was 26 years old, working as a junior editor at a Boston publishing house. He had begun to develop an interest in astronomical observation. He owned a small telescope. He had started to keep careful records of stellar positions. He was, in many ways, the audience Eleanor had been waiting for. On March 12, 1909, Eleanor asked to speak with Charles. The conversation took place over 2 days. Charles recorded it in his journal the following day. He wrote that his great-grandmother had made it abundantly clear that she did not expect to be believed, but that she believed it was necessary that someone know. Eleanor's account, as Charles transcribed it, contains the following specific observations. The belt of Orion, she said, had shifted measurably southward, not northward. Southward, this was significant because if stars were moving due to precession or proper motion, certain stars should move in certain directions. Multiple stars moving in the same direction as a group would suggest not individual stellar motion, but rather a shift in the observer's perspective, or a shift in the celestial sphere itself. She had kept no instruments, but she had kept consistency. She had looked at Orion from the same location, on clear nights, for 74 years. She was certain of what she had observed. She had noticed that certain dim stars visible in her childhood seemed to have become dimmer still, to the point of invisibility. Conversely, certain stars that had been barely visible to her young eyes had become more prominent. This could be explained by age and declining vision, except that the pattern was systematic. Stars in certain regions of the sky seemed dimmer. Stars in other regions seemed brighter. This did not match the pattern of vision loss due to aging. She had noticed that the apparent distance between certain star pairs had changed. The Pleiades, she said, used to be tighter. When she was a girl, they occupied a space, in her memory, smaller than the current span. By 1909, the cluster seemed to have opened like a fan. She had mentioned this to her daughter, Margaret, in 1887. Margaret had looked at the Pleiades and said she saw no difference, but Eleanor noted that Margaret had never been trained to watch stars the way Eleanor had. Margaret had no baseline to measure against. She had noticed something else, which she described haltingly. She said that the colour of certain stars seemed different, not brighter or dimmer, but a different colour. She had no language for this. She said that Betelgeuse seemed more red than she remembered. She said that Sirius seemed to have less white in it, more blue. She knew as she spoke that this was the most difficult thing to convey. Colour memory is notoriously unreliable. She knew that any scientist would discount this observation immediately. But she offered it anyway, because it was part of what she had seen. She ended by telling Charles something that he marked with particular emphasis in his journal. She said, "I am 93 years old. I have looked at the sky more carefully and more consistently than most people look at anything in their lives. I am not a fool. I am not confused. I am old, but not demented. Something has happened to the heavens. The institutions that are designed to observe the heavens do not seem willing to see it. Perhaps they cannot see it. Perhaps their instruments are designed in such a way that they filter out the very thing they would need to detect. Or perhaps they see it and see fit not to tell the people. I do not know which is true. But I know what I have seen." Charles Vance spent the rest of his life in obscurity. He became a reasonably successful editor. He published a few minor works on literary history. He never published an account of his great-grandmother's observations. He did, however, continue to keep detailed records of stellar positions. In 1932, he donated those records to the Boston Public Library. They have never been analysed comprehensively. They contain observations spanning 34 years, from 1898 to 1932, each one meticulously recorded with date, time, location, and instrument specifications. What these records show is subtle, but consistent. Certain stars appear to have shifted position in patterns that do not match historical measurements. The shifts are small. They are not large enough to be explained by precession or proper motion. They are consistent in direction. They suggest, if taken at face value, some form of systematic displacement across a region of sky covering roughly 40 degrees of celestial longitude. When an astronomer at Harvard reviewed Vance's records in 1987, he wrote in his report, "The observations are meticulously recorded and internally consistent. However, they contradict measurements from major astronomical institutions. The most parsimonious explanation is instrumental error or observer bias. The alternative explanations require physical mechanisms for which we have no theoretical basis." The report was filed. It was not widely circulated. The observations were not incorporated into any major astronomical database. Eleanor Vance's belief was not validated. But it was not disproven either. It simply remained, in the archive, as something that did not fit into the categories by which the scientific establishment had decided that reality should be organised. Eleanor Vance died in July 1909. The cause was listed as pneumonia, though Charles's journal suggests that she had simply stopped trying to live. She had said what needed to be said. She had found someone willing to listen. She had done what she could. She had carried, from the gaslit nights of 1816 Connecticut to the electric-lit nights of 1909 Boston. A memory of the sky that contradicted everything official astronomy was willing to acknowledge. The room where Eleanor Vance watched the stars from Beacon Hill no longer exists. The house where she lived in Boston was demolished in 1952. Her journals were destroyed by her great-granddaughter in 1947, deemed not valuable enough to preserve. Charles Vance's observations remain, but they remain unconsulted, unintegrated into the larger body of astronomical knowledge. And the question she raised, the question that Struve had raised, that Jacobi had raised, that something in the celestial sphere might not be fixed, might not be where it had always been, remains unanswered. The stars, as we observe them today, are exactly where the instruments tell us they are. And yet, if someone had watched them as carefully as Eleanor Vance did, across a span of time long enough to develop an intuitive knowledge of where they should be, what would they see?